Hi everybody, for our second stop, we're now in Lower Manhattan. We're in front of the Tenement Museum on the Lower East Side. I'm standing just a few blocks from the Williamsburg Bridge. I'm about a mile and a half from the famous Brooklyn Bridge. Oh, behind me is the Tenement Museum. Around the corner from me is 260 Delancey Street, where my grandfather was born. A tenement is a small apartment where many people are crowded in. Much of what we know about this comes from the exposés of Jacob Riis. Jacob Riis was a video photographer in the 1890s who would go around Lower Manhattan, check on these immigrant apartments, take pictures of how crowded in these new immigrants were. You can see pictures of them above. These are some of Riis's actual photographs. And he would take with him Police Commissioner Teddy Roosevelt, who would eventually become Governor Teddy Roosevelt, who would eventually become President Teddy Roosevelt. Turn of the century, Lower Manhattan was a melting pot of many immigrant groups. You had Jews who moved to this area of Essex Street and Delancey Street and opened delicatessens. Part of the reason for this is they brought their old world recipes from Germany, and they had their first chance to really get large pieces of meat, and from that they made brisket. They took brisket, and from that they made pastrami. So around this area you can still find delis and get a pastrami on rye and a dill pickle. 1 or 2 blocks over you have Chinatown, where you can get authentic Hunan and Cantonese cuisine. These neighbors all came here in between 1860 and 1920. 1 or 2 blocks over is Little Italy. If you're familiar with the Billy Joel song Little Man on Mulberry Street, Mulberry Street is just over my shoulder, about 3 blocks away. That's where Little Italy is if you want authentic Italian food. And there are Irish pubs all over Lower Manhattan surrounding this area because the Irish came here in the 1840s as a result of the Irish potato famine. So by the 1860s, the Irish were proud Americans fighting in the Civil War. But by the 1880s, you have Irish Americans carving out their own unique Irish experience. Irish traditionally on St. Patrick's Day will eat corned beef and cabbage. Well, back in Ireland, they didn't have cows. They had a lot of hogs. So living a few blocks away from Jewish immigrants who were making pastrami, the Irish had their corned beef, which is uniquely an American dish, and it's from the same cut of meat you get the pastrami. Something anybody who grills would know about. It's called the brisket. What makes this immigrant experience so unique, so American, is the Port of New York was the major entry point for any European coming here by boat between 1860 and 1920, when the naturalization and anti-immigration laws closed the ports of New York to all but 2 or 3% of immigrants from European countries. A tenement, as I mentioned, is a tiny apartment where many were crowded in together. Now the problem with that is when you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 men crowded together in an 11 by 11 room without any ventilation, with just a privy in the basement, it breeds disease. And this area was rampant with cholera, typhoid, and the thing that killed my great-grandfather in the 1920s, tuberculosis. Due to Jacob Riis's work, How the Other Half Lives, as I said, some of these are his photographs, many of these tiny apartments, these tenements, were torn down and were replaced with much more spacious apartments, each with its own bathroom, with windows for ventilation. But this is a unique immigrant experience specific to New York City that this museum can tell the viewer about. We're now on to our next public history in Manhattan.